Hi everyone, welcome back to Project. What we're going to be working on now is Kit 302, the second of our two twin units. In this session today, what we're going to talk to you about is what's going on in our second Agile cycle. So we're going to be introducing you to the assessment and the particular requirements and the next steps for moving forward into the same project that you've been working on in semester 1. Before we begin, just a notice about how we're going to be running Kit 302 this year. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing COVID circumstance, we're going to be remaining online. So just as we did in first semester, all of our management meetings and our team meetings and our client meetings will be undertaken online, either through Zoom or some other mechanism that you have access to. Some of the assessment has been changed in this version of Kit 302 to ensure that that is still able to be undertaken. So while it's not necessarily how we would generally run projects, it's the best option we have right now given our ongoing circumstance and our isolation requirements. I hope you all stay safe and well. Let's now revise what we're doing projects for and how they're going to help us moving forward. So this is what's called a capstone project, and basically that means at the end of your degree, this is where you put all of your previous knowledge and skills and experiences together in a practical way to show that you have, throughout the degree, gained all of the skills necessary to operate as a professional ICT person out in industry, wherever that leads you. So what we're going to be doing is hoping that you will go back through your previous units, whether they're programming, whether they're business process analysis, whether they're cybersecurity or human-computer interaction or programming, and bring those skills forward to apply them to a real-life project. This is exactly what you'll be doing when you operate as a professional ICT person. You're going to be having an opportunity to work both technically, professionally, and behaviourally, looking at all of the different aspects of technology that have to be considered when we're really creating something or a real artifact for a real-life client. You're going to be working on the same project with the same team that you commenced with in Kit 301, so nothing will really change. However, it needs to be noted here that not all members of every team will continue onto 302. If that relates to your particular project, I will be sending an individual email to your team letting you know if there have been any team member changes. So keep an eye out for that. If you don't receive that from me, that simply means the team members you had in semester 1 will remain for you in semester 2. So look out for that. Because this is a twin unit to Kit 301, the intended learning objectives are in fact going to be the same, although the weighting and the measuring of them is going to be different than we did in first semester. So the 3 things that we hope everybody who's finishing this course will be able to exhibit and apply in real life are these. We want you to exhibit skills in the design and development of a technical system that supports the needs of the client, applying a user-centered approach and adhering to professional standards and codes of conduct. So what that means is, can you actually create a technical artifact? Does that artifact suit the needs and requirements of a particular client? Have you considered those users in the design and development, and does it adhere to appropriate policies, standards, and protocols that guide our work as ICT professionals? This is one of the most core skills of being an ICT professional, not just the capacity to build something, but to build something that is useful and usable to your particular clients and users. Our second ILO relates to how you operate as an effective member of a team. Now, any kind of project brings together people with very different backgrounds, very different interests, and very different skills. What we need to do in a project is ensure that we, as individuals and members of the team, are actually making a solid contribution. There is no need or space in a team for somebody who doesn't make an active and useful contribution. It's a waste of resources. And so what we want you to be able to exhibit in this project is that you can actually make an active and useful contribution to the team. In fact, we want to know that the team is better off because you are actually in it. If you cannot exhibit that skill or make that active contribution, sadly, you won't be working as an effective ICT professional and you won't be passing this unit. Our third relates to you as an individual. Do you have the ability to self-direct your own learning, Find out what you need to know. Develop skills in areas that need development so that your project, your team, and your clients can all benefit. This is about you showing initiative, you going out, you identifying your own needs, building those into your overall work plan, and bringing those to the fore for the rest of your client and your project team. These are 3 massively important skills that we have as ICT professionals. You don't get to just go out and create your own thing. You don't get to just make your own decisions when you're in a team. You don't get to just sit back and hope that other people will tell you what to do. So exhibiting these 3 skills is absolutely core to ensuring you have the capacity to go and be an effective ICT professional. So that's what we're hoping you're going to be exhibiting in this unit. Failure to exhibit any one of these 3 skills means you're not ready to go out and be an ICT professional, so you won't, sadly, be able to pass this course. So please engage in these ILOs, understand what they mean, and think about how you can increase or improve your performance in these areas. This unit consists of 2 very large Agile cycles that continue on from the first Agile cycle you did in the second half of first semester. In the second Agile cycle, or the first one of this phase, you're going to be focusing on users, and you're going to be spending the first 7 weeks of this semester creating or continuing to create your technical artifact, but also now bringing in the perspective of users, security, and privacy. In our second half of this semester, we go into our third Agile cycle, and this is where we finalize the requirements and the building of our technical artifact, putting it together so that it is appropriate for final delivery. This is where we're also going to be handing over, and we're going to be informing our users and our clients about how to access the functionality of our system. So it's a little different in this Agile cycle, but we'll talk about that as we get closer. As you'll see from this schedule, we don't meet every week. In fact, we don't need to meet every week because you're going to be doing a huge amount of work, both in technical development, documentation, and manual creation. So there's a lot of work to be done. So we're only going to check in together when it's absolutely necessary, or in fact, when you need some guidance. So this is our schedule. In our first week, which is when you'll be listening to this lecture, you're simply going to be listening to the background, going onto the Milo site, having a look at the assessment requirements, learning about what are the next set of activities that are to be done with your particular project. You're going to be making contact with your client, you're going to be seeing them again, you're going to be informing them about what this next Agile cycle is all about. You're certainly also going to be doing some background reading and retaining or reminding yourself about some of the skills that you've learned in previous units that will help in this Agile cycle. In our week 2, we're going to get together in an online management meeting. And in this meeting, we will reflect on the last semester that you had. We will talk about any feedback that I've received from your client that will be helpful for your project moving forward, and ensuring that you have a plan for the next 7 weeks. In week 5, we're going to come back together again, and this is where you're going to have prepared a draft of your second Agile cycle report, and we're going to review that for you, going to give you some feedback and some advice to move forward, and we're also going to talk about what is going on in your project and any progress updates that you have to make. That's going to lead us up to week 6, and in week 6 we don't meet together, but what we're going to do is we're going to be submitting that major document, which is our Agile 2 report, and the full specifications of this can be found on Milo, but we're going to talk about in just a moment. In week 7, we'll have a management meeting where I would have gone through and graded your Agile 2 reports, and I'll be giving you some feedback, and you will be giving a demonstration of the artifact that you have continued to create over those 6 weeks. This leads us up to the mid-semester break, which this semester is going to be between weeks 7 and 8. When we come back in week 8, we're going to start our third Agile cycle, and I'm going to prepare and deploy another one of these online lectures for you. And in this lecture, what we're going to be talking about specifically is handing over and closing out a project. This is where we create manuals for both the users and the developers. We are going to start talking about how you go about presenting or marketing the overall contributions that you've made. And in this version of 302, because of COVID-19, we're going to do that through the creation of a video rather than a physical demonstration and presentation like we've done in the past. So that's what we'll do in week 8, and then up to week 11, you're going to be working very heavily to finish off the coding and development of your technical artifact. In week 11, we'll get together again, have a progress update, and you will also show me the draft of your manuals and your Agile Cycle 3 report, leading to its submission in week 12, and then in week 13, our final management meeting together, where you will talk about your process of handing over the project to your client. You will give me a demonstration of the final product, and I will then review the submitted video presentation. So as you can see, while we're not necessarily meeting a lot face-to-face, there is a lot of work to be done. There are checkpoints that we will be meeting up together, but of course you can, if you are needing to, make additional appointments with me to talk about different specifications as you move forward. So this is how we're going to be operating Kit 302 this semester. As I just briefly mentioned, some teams have lost members because not all people get through Kit 301. If that's the case, you will receive an email from me. If it doesn't relate to your team, continue as you were at the end of Agile Cycle 1. The roles that we had in our first Agile cycle were appropriate to the needs of that particular cycle and what we were creating and what we had to deliver. Roles for Kit 302 are in fact different. You have an opportunity now to try out different roles. If your team wants to change the roles that were allocated in Agile Cycle 1, you can absolutely do that. For example, if you were project manager in Kit 301 and don't want to do that again, that's perfectly fine. That can go to another team member. If you want to try being lead documentation in this round, that's entirely okay as well. So what we want your team to do now is spend some time before our management meeting in week 2, identifying the new role allocation that is appropriate for your team. You would have had many weeks in last semester identifying who was good at what particular tasks and who maybe wasn't good at the task that they were allocated. Now is an opportunity to rectify that circumstance, to get skills in different areas, and perhaps to be better placed in something that best uses your own skill sets. So please think about this carefully. It's going to stick for the whole of this semester, not just this cycle. So please, if you put your hand up for a role, you must take it very seriously. You must contribute actively to that role. You must be a leader. There are additional roles that weren't in the Agile Cycle 1 that are now coming into play because of our needs for these next 2 Agile cycles. So just as we had in our first cycle, we do of course need a client liaison. This is again the person who makes the meetings and every week maintains contact with the client to ensure that they are kept up to date, they are aware of any decisions being made, and their feedback is attained constantly. So if you are not comfortable in making contact with a client or interacting professionally at that level, this role is not for you. But if you have those skill sets and you'd like to make closer contact with your client, maybe this is something that you'd consider. The project manager is, again, as you'll already know, somebody whose job it is to lead the project forward. It is not the boss, it is not the person who makes all of the decisions, but it is somebody who has strong planning, organization, and people skills to keep everybody on track. This is the person who will constantly look at the Gantt and milestone charts, identifying whether things are on track. This will be ensuring that everybody's doing what they need to do for their contributions to the project. This requires a very strong leader. If you think that's something that you'd like to try out, please feel free to have that conversation with your team. We of course need lead programmers because this whole semester is about the completion of a technical artifact, but a lead programmer is not an isolated person. It is somebody who leads the programming process that is supported by every other member of our team. Every member needs to show that they have the capacity to create a technical artifact. And so most members of the team will actually be doing some level of programming or coding or something that contributes to the technical artifact. So this is somebody who can lead that team, make effective decisions that other people can follow. A new role that we have in this cycle is what's called needs mapping. And we'll talk about that in a moment. This is really, really important because one of the most important things to understand about technical artifacts is that they need to be something that is useful to the client and the potential users. And if we don't understand what those needs are, we can, in many cases, create an artifact that is in no way useful to these people and therefore won't actually even be adopted. So this new role is going to help our team better understand the nature and needs of the people who are actually going to be using our system. Now, in Agile 1, we had a very strong focus on the needs of the client. In Agile 2, we're having a very strong focus on the needs of the users. And so this new role will engage the receipt of content or new requirements from a set of users and then building those into what is required to actually be created as a set of use cases or particular requirements for the particular system. So again, what we need here is somebody who understands processes and somebody who understands people and has the capacity to interact with people, ask questions, and map those out in an effective way so that your technical development team can actually identify new sets of requirements that weren't necessarily identified in Agile 1. Another role that we have is security and privacy review lead. This is a person who perhaps has done a cybersecurity unit with us before and can identify aspects of security and privacy that relate to your project and your technical artifact, how vulnerabilities might relate to what you are creating, and how those are going to be mitigated in the design and development of your system. So this is somebody who needs to be drawing on previous cybersecurity and privacy skills, or in fact can do that research to bring those recommendations back to the team. This is going to be an important task in Agile 2. As we are continuing to create our interfaces, we need somebody to lead that process. So sometimes there might be continuation of artifacts if we're creating games or something more playful, or interfaces if we have more of an interactive kind of system. So again, these are the people who have strong artistic and awareness of HCI, these kinds of things. We also, of course, are going to have a lot of documentation undertaken, but it's not just the Agile reports this semester. It's actually going to be manuals as we move into our second Agile phase. So our lead documentation also needs to have technical competency to write both from a technical perspective and a user perspective. Some of our requirements of Agile 3 are going to be create a user manual, but also a technical manual. So there's lots of different styles of communication writing that is required throughout this semester. So lead documentation and manuals is now the person who is going to start looking at the different ways of writing and communicating different information relating to projects. That is going to be a very substantive role in this semester. And as we continue throughout our semester, we are going to culminate in what would normally be a presentation, but in our case is going to be a recorded video to your client and to your general body of assessors who are ICT staff. And so what you're going to be doing is collecting video footage throughout the semester of what your team are working on, so that you can embed that in a very professional and structured presentation. Now, we're going to be talking a lot more about that presentation in our Agile 3 cycle, but the specifications are already online on Milo, so you can get some insight. But it is useful for somebody to start developing skills in video creation and production and collecting some visual imagery so that you have that when it comes time to putting that together in Agile 3. So there is a lot going on in this semester. There are a lot of roles in this semester. You will be taking on more than one role, but you will also be actually completing the project. So there will be many hats that you will be wearing. please make sure that you identify where your skill sets are and take on roles appropriately, because we don't have time for you to be practicing these roles. We want you to be performing them in this round. So think about these, have this conversation, and let me know what they are in our management meeting in week 2 together. As I mentioned before, while the 3 ILOs are the same as they were in first semester, so KIT 301, they are actually weighted quite differently in semester 2. And that's because for semester 1, that was about you practicing your different skill sets. In semester 2, you've had all of that time to practice, and now we're expecting you to perform at a high level. And so the weightings of these are now changing. So the software development ILO, so ILO 1, is actually going to be weighted at 50%. So the development of the technical artifact and the final product is now very heavily weighted when it was less so in first semester. Teamwork is massively important to getting this project finalized, and so your capacity to work effectively as a member of a team and bring useful insights to that team and do active work and participate strongly is very, very important. So that is now weighted at 35%. If you are a member of a team who got through 301 simply by just attending, not participating, not initiating ideas, you are not going to pass this unit, because this ILO relates to performing strongly in those attributes. We have less of a focus on individual contributions. This means going out and learning. However, that is still very important to ensuring that your team knows how to move forward. You are going to be bringing ideas to that team. You are going to be doing your own personal research and reflection and improving so that the team as a whole improves. So that ILO is going to be weighted at 15% in this semester. So there is lots to do. However, there is time to do it. And as we said in our first semester, we are expecting about 10 to 12 hours per member of every team to contribute to get the work done in semester 2. If you only did a few hours of project last semester, that is not going to be enough for you to pass this unit. We don't want you to be spending more than the allocated time for project, because presumably you've got other units, so please don't do more than 20 hours. But some people really like working on project, and that's completely fine. But make sure that you work in proportion to the weighting of the overall unit, 1 of 4. If you work about 10 to 12 hours, you will have a lot of work done amongst the members of your team. I don't need you to work all hours of the day and night to effectively complete project. It's about the quality of the work that you do. And so that is what we will be looking for and expecting you to report on every time we do a peer and self-assessment and every time we do a management meeting and a demonstration. Your contributions need now not just to be adequate or enough. They have to be high quality, and they have to be professional so that we can identify whether you have the capacity to actually do this in industry, which is what this unit is all about. All right, so let's first talk about what this cycle is going to include. This is the first 7 weeks of this semester. What we're going to be creating is an Agile report that has a number of requirements in it and a number of components to it. So this is a large cycle that, as most Agile cycles, will include a process of information gathering, design and development, testing and feedback, and then iterating into cycle 3. So it will be assessing all 3 of those intended learning outcomes. So you have an opportunity to contribute to your marks from this set of assignment components to every one of the ILOs. This is a large assignment and will contribute 30% of your overall grade. It consists of an Agile report, a self and peer assessment, and a demonstration. However, within each one of these components, there are particular requirements. The full assignment specification is already available on Milo, as is the CRA, to guide you through this. I will be expecting to see a draft of this report and these components in week 4 in our management meeting. So please start work on these immediately. There are different components and they are due at different times. So the report and your self-review, which is available will be put into Milo into your group submission folder, is due at 5 p.m. on the 20th of August, and that is in week 6. The following day at 10 a.m., which is the 21st of August, you will put in your personal peer review into your individual Dropbox, just as you did in Kit 301. In the following management meeting, which is week 7, you'll be performing a full demonstration of what you have created in the last 7 weeks. Every member of the team must attend. Every member of the team must present a component that they have been responsible for. So please put preparation into that activity. What we're going to do now over the next couple of slides is break all of these components down and give you some insight about what is required for each particular part. You can, of course, already read the specifications and you can ask additional questions, but hopefully this will be enough to get you started before we get together in our week 2 management meeting. In our first semester, you created an Agile report, which was simply a report identifying the components of the Agile cycle that you had completed in the previous set of weeks. We're going to do another one now. However, the specifications and requirements of this Agile cycle are different than those from Agile Cycle 1. So please ensure you read the specifications and listen to this carefully because there are new components that you haven't done previously. So the first thing that we're going to be doing in this Agile report is shifting our focus from the needs of the client that we have already spent 13 weeks investigating to now the needs of the user. I'll explain this in the next couple of slides, but the users are the people, obviously, who are going to be using the final product that you are creating. And so we need to ensure that what we are creating is not just what suits the needs of your client who has had a good idea about what would be great to create, but the people who actually have to use it. Does it meet the needs that they have? Now, for this task, depending on the kind of project that you are creating, you will either do one of these things. You will be mapping the tasks of the user of the system. So for example, if you are creating a transaction-based system, how does somebody actually complete that transaction in real life? And then you're going to identify whether your system has the right components to let them do that particular task. So it's a mapping of what they do or what they should do or what they need to do versus what your system will allow them to do. This is how we identify whether the client has been able to give you full insight into the actual specifications. And often they can't because they have a different perspective than the people who are actually using the system every day. Alternatively, if you are creating a persuasive technology, which is kind of more like a serious game, for example, something that you are trying to get somebody to use to change their behavior, what we need to do is understand what the behavior currently is and what the new targeted behavior is. So if you're creating one of those kinds of projects, what you're going to be doing is mapping behavior before and target, and then ensuring or comparing these kinds of behaviors as to whether your system is or will allow that user to undertake the behavior in that particular way. So again, it's a checkpoint. Does what the user currently or need to do map what you are creating for them to actually action that? Alternatively, if you are creating an entertainment game, for example, this is what we would call an experience technology. And so what we want you to do is map the experience that you want your client to achieve. So this is where you'll be exploring the kind of experience that you want your client to have by participating in your game. Is it a navigation experience? Is it a playful experience? Is it a challenge experience? Whatever it might be. But you need to map that out very consistently and comprehensively to then compare against what you've actually been creating. So again, even in a game, your client will come to you and say, I want you to create this. But if they don't understand how a user might actually respond to that, or whether the potential player has the opportunity to gain a particular experience, you'll be creating something that doesn't necessarily fit the needs of the user and therefore is less likely to be adopted. This is a massively important component of understanding how do we create technologies. So the first thing every team is going to do is a mapping exercise. Depending on what kind of project you have, it will be either a user tasks map, a behavior map, or an experience map. And we'll talk about more about that in a moment. In addition to that mapping, you are also going to be undertaking or providing a description of the privacy and security concerns related to what you are creating. You're going to be exploring things like what data are you collecting, where is the data being sourced and hosted, who's seeing the data, what kind of security vulnerabilities are there likely to come about because of the thing that you're creating for a client and a set of users. So it's about recognizing vulnerabilities and reporting those and then creating a mitigation strategy. What are you doing in your technical artifact to limit the impact of any of those vulnerabilities? How are you protecting data? How are you validating content that goes into your site or whatever it might be? So this is where we're expecting you to explore both security and privacy, assessing your site or your technical artifact against those characteristics and developing a plan to mitigate any risks. The next thing you're going to be doing is, as you did in Agile 1, describing the progress towards the technical development of the software. So again, this is where we want you to go and review your last 6 or 7 weeks of Agile 2 and talk to what was meant to have been created and what has actually been created and any differences between those two areas. As again we did in Agile 1, we're going to be then talking about what is the outcomes of our technical and user testing phase. So you're going to be doing a user testing phase, you're going to be doing a technical testing phase, and you're going to be reporting on the outcomes of those. So what has it actually shown? And then those, of course, usefully lead into, well, what has to happen now? So this is where, again, we have a summary of the design and requirement changes required as a result of the testing and client feedback. So this is where you talk to users, you do technical testing, and you talk to clients about what you've created and what has to change. Now, in semester 1, many of you just reported that as we've decided to change a thing, or we've decided to change the sequence, or we've moved something around, or we're not kind of including that function anymore. That's fine when we learn about how do we do projects, but professionally, that is not how we do these things. Professionally, when things need to change, we have what are called change logs. And this is where we're expecting you now, not just to say, we've decided something has to change, but you actually go through a formal process of getting approval for those changes from your client. So we will introduce you to change logs, and that will necessitate the updating of anything like a Gantt chart to show the impact on schedules and milestones throughout the rest of this semester. So now we're being a little bit more rigorous about the kinds of project management mechanisms we use to communicate changes and changes to either design requirements or milestones. So this Agile cycle is in some ways similar to Agile 1, but it is much more comprehensive and much more oriented to a more professional approach to mapping what's going on, identifying progress, and identifying the need for change. Let me introduce you to something that's really important to anybody who works as an ICT professional. It's the concept that just because we can create a technical artifact does not mean by any means that that system or that technical artifact will get ever used. That's a really, really important lesson for anybody working in this space to learn. You need to understand that not all systems get adopted, and that's usually because they don't meet the needs of the user. So as I just mentioned in the previous slide, your mapping activities will help to ensure that it is more likely that your system will actually get adopted. Systems need to be useful to the users. If they don't see an immediate and active use for your system, they will do things the way they have always done things or not do the thing you want them to do at all. They don't necessarily always have to use what you've created. And if it's too hard or not useful, they simply won't use it. It has to be useful, but it also has to be easy to use. The idea of creating technical artifacts is to make life easier, to do no harm. And so what we have to ensure is what we're creating is the best way for the user to complete the task that they are coming to your system for. What is the most easy and effective way that they can get their thing done? This brings us to what's called the technology acceptance model. This is a very broadly used model in all areas of ICT, and it helps us to understand the likelihood of what we have created and whether it's actually likely to be implemented at all. It's quite a complex model and has a whole lot of variables, but what I want to draw your attention to is those two in the center of this model: perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use. These are two massively important variables that we can actually design for. So we can ensure that if we understand the needs of the user and design for them effectively, somebody's more likely to adopt our system. And if we understand the needs of the user to make it really easy for them to fulfill their task, and we design that into our system as well, it is more likely to be adopted. These are two things that we as designers and developers can actively influence. Lots of other things about this model are about the person who's going to be using it, their experiences, their backgrounds, and their ideas. We don't necessarily have influence over those, but what we can influence is usefulness and ease of use. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this Agile cycle. So if you don't meet both of these user requirements, not just one or the other, but both, your system will fail. It will not be implemented. It doesn't matter if it's beautifully created, technically excellent. If it's not useful and it's not easy to use, it will not be adopted. So how do we ensure these two things? That's what we're going to be doing in our first Agile cycle. We can ensure usefulness by knowing what the needs of the user actually are. What task or activity or experience are they coming to your system to achieve? Once we know that, we can design for that. And similarly, how do we ensure ease of use? Well, we need to understand the principles of HCI, human-computer interaction. We need to think about how does somebody work through our system in terms of navigation? What kind of accessibility requirements are there? What kind of progression, what kind of interactivity do people expect to have? And then once we understand that, we can design for those kinds of things. So I'm introducing you to this technology acceptance model, which is broader than just what we're using it for today, but to identify or introduce you to the concept of usefulness and ease of use. If we do not understand those, we do not have an effectively developed or designed and therefore not adopted system. Now, in our Agile Cycle 1, our client gave us some really good ideas about what our system should do and why, but they are not necessarily the user. And the user may and probably does have an entirely different perspective on what they would use the system for. So this Agile Cycle is going to be about augmenting our existing knowledge of what is required with this new set of information coming specifically from the users. We're going to talk about more of this in a moment. But again, these specifications are fully identified on the Milo site for you. As I just described in the previous slide, not all systems have the same purpose, and therefore we need to understand the purpose before we understand whether our design is actually going to be useful to the users. So when we look at the different kinds of systems, there are many, many, many different kinds of systems, but the most prominent ones that you're likely to come across are interactive systems, persuasive systems, and experience systems. And in fact, most of our projects are either one or the other of these. So interactive systems are those that you and I are probably most familiar with using. These are the ones that you often find in business. They're people's websites where they want you to actually fulfill a particular task. And so if we want somebody to interact with our system to complete a particular task, we need to understand how our system will help them effectively do that. So firstly, we need to understand the task that the user is actually coming to our system to undertake in the first place. What is their preferred way of doing that task? What are the steps that they need to fulfill to be able to complete that task? And once we know those particular steps, we can design to ensure that those steps actually do feature in an effective way in our system. And similarly, once we know what the steps are, we can go, well, what makes those steps easy to work through? And this is more about then the look and feel of the system. So if we have an interactive system, what we often do is spend time with users mapping their tasks. And what you'll see on this slide at the top of the right-hand side is a very basic flowchart. Now, flowcharts, or process maps, as they are often called, although they can be somewhat slightly different, simply shows what a process from the start of an activity set is until the end of that activity set. And so when we map and model processes of interactive systems, they often are represented as flowcharts or process maps. So if your project is an interactive system, you want somebody just to interact with your system to complete a particular activity, what you're going to be doing in this first part of your Agile 2 cycle is doing this kind of map or model that simply shows how or what are the steps to somebody coming to it versus somebody finishing it. Now, what's really important to notice here is this is not your perception of their activities. This is not your client's perception of their activities. This is where you actually have to, with the permission of your client, get access to typical type real users. They have been sent an email by me indicating that one of their roles now is to get access to typical type users. And so through them, you will start to interview users and you will ask questions like, well, does this task exist already? If it does, how do you do it? How easy is it? Do you prefer it to be a different way? How long does it take? Why do you do it that way? Then that gives you some insight as to how things are done. Then you can say, well, ideally, what would you like it to be? What should we include? What do we have to make sure that you're able to do? And alternatively, if the task doesn't even exist, it's a brand new thing, you can say, how would you imagine this works? If you imagine doing this task, how would you go about it? What are the steps that you think you would need to follow? And so getting that kind of user insight allows you to map an existing process or a future process so that you can then test that against what you're creating to ensure that there is consistency. And so both the user perspective and the client perspective are embedded in your design. Alternatively, you might be creating what's called a persuasive system. And these are things like gamification or serious games or any kind of technology that is designed to create a change in a user behavior. So for example, this might be an app to get people to move more, or for somebody to do a particular kind of exercise, or to map how much they've eaten, or to stop smoking. Those kinds of things are what we call persuasive technologies. Now, in this space, it's not just about fulfilling a task. It's actually understanding the nature of the human who is going to be using the system. And to start off with, which is also represented at the bottom of this slide, that circle, that's what's called the behavior change wheel. Now, the behavior change wheel is an interesting and useful technique that comes from the discipline of psychology. And what it allows us as technical designers to do is actually identify an understanding of the problem that currently exists for that user, why they behave in the way that they do, what is the behavior we'd like them to do, what kinds of things can we put in our system to influence that behavior. And once we've mapped and modeled that kind of behavior, we can again look across the system that we're creating and say, well, did we understand the behavior? Is that built into our system? If we want them to do a thing, are the things that psychology tells us that they will respond to actually in our app or our game or something like that? So behavior mapping and modeling tells us what they are doing, what we want them to do, and what we need to put in our system to help them do that. Then we can translate that back into particular requirements and specifications. A third type is what are called experience systems, and these are quite commonly known as the games that most of you are probably already playing. So what we see here is a representation of a basic chart that shows us how or what elements of the game are being moved through in terms of a logical sequence. We see these in movies, we see these in games. And so what this map will allow us to show is what is the experience that somebody will go through, and are there touch points through this map that show where those experiences are actually gained? How many of them? Why are they sequenced in that particular way? Why are they represented in the way that they are? So what we would do for an experience project is we would identify what kind of experience we are trying to achieve and how in the design that is actually going to be achieved. And then once we've got that information, similarly, we can go back to the design we already have and say, does this match? Do we have the experiences? Do we have them in the right place? Do we have them in the right sequence? Do we have them in the right frequency? That will ensure that our design is actually useful to bringing about the outcome that we actually need. So in doing this kind of mapping, it will augment our view of our system that we already have from our client with the needs of our user, and that will allow us to get much closer to this concept of our system actually being effectively adopted and used by our potential users. This is a massively important task that anybody who's doing ICT development needs to engage in, and we do it professionally every single day. It's now time for you to start engaging in that as well. The next new area of the Agile report that you haven't seen before relates to the concepts of security and privacy. And once again, you have probably done units with us that relate to these kinds of things. Privacy, definitely in your first year when you were looking at codes of conduct and how people interact with systems and the responsibilities that we have. And security has probably come up in some of the units where you're dealing with issues of vulnerability mitigation prevention relating to cybersecurity. So what we're doing now is bringing that knowledge into our project as well, because that may not have been something that you have spent much time thinking about to date. So for this assignment, we want a description of the privacy concerns related to the technical artifact and solutions being implemented to mitigate these vulnerabilities. So basically that means, have you thought about what is going to arise because of what you are building in terms of privacy concerns, and what are you going to do to limit those? Similarly, we have the same thing for security. What security vulnerabilities come about because of what you're creating, and what are you going to do to limit the impact of those actually happening? So when it comes to privacy, the kinds of things that you might be thinking about, although this is a very brief list and yours will be much more comprehensive, relates to what data will you actually collect? How is it going to be verified as correct data? Because there's lots and lots of cases where people's particular data sets are actually incorrect out there in the world. What does that mean? How will this data be stored? What are you going to do about it? Who's accessing it? How is it going to be used? Who's going to have access to it, and how are they going to be using it? How is the data going to actually be protected? What kind of protection does it actually need? So in terms of investigating privacy, there's a whole body of knowledge about how to embed privacy principles in technical development. That's something that you're going to now explore. Similarly, looking at security, we're interested in, where's your system going to be hosted? Is that secure? What kind of access do you have? Do you have backups of all of your data, or are those recommendations you need to make? What about network and device security? If this is, where's the data being stored? Is it actually on the device, or is it on a server somewhere? What about encryption and authentication of data as it is actually passed through your system? Do you need to create a security policy? Do you need a security statement on your technical artifact? Are you going to be monitoring your systems? In that case, what does that mean for users and such? Are you going to be undertaking or recommending updates and patches, and what does that mean in terms of ongoing security? So what we want you to do is do both a privacy and security review, not just a general one, but one about your particular environment, your particular users, and your particular technical artifact. Think about how to ensure that this is not just a useful tool, but a secure and private tool given that as ICT professionals, we have a code of conduct that means we are not allowed to do harm, or we should avoid doing harm to anybody. And that means releasing their data unnecessarily, making things insecure so that people and their data are made vulnerable. It is your responsibility to ensure that that does not happen, and your experience now is going to help you build that into your system. The next part of our Agile cycle will be familiar to you. This is where we're going to report on the progress towards the technical development of the software. So at the end of Agile 1, you had then a new or updated list of things that were going to be created in Agile 2. Now what we're going to do is assess the completion of those tasks. So what we want you to do again is use Gantt charts here. What was the original plan? What is the progress towards the completion of the plan? And what are the differences in the proposed plan and the completion plan? Explain what has gone on and why. And again, just as you did in our first Agile cycle, we're doing a testing phase, which is very common in any kind of Agile cycle. So again, we're going to be doing technical testing. And in this report, we want you to describe again both your testing protocol and the outcomes of that testing phase. We're going to do user testing because now users are much more important than they've been in our previous cycle. How and what are you asking them? And what are the outcomes of that testing protocol? And then similarly, client feedback. Given that you have integrated both their needs now and user needs, we want them to review this again with a new kind of set of lenses. I want you to figure out, or I want you to document what they are being asked, how their feedback is being sought, and what the outcomes of that feedback are. So once again, a similar process as you did in Agile 1, but a bit more of a focus now on the particular specifications of the user. Our final component here is a summary of the design and requirement changes. Now in Agile 1, we've already done this, but what we were was a little bit loose on the way we did this. There wasn't a lot of project methodology brought in at that stage because we just wanted you to get familiar. Now, of course, what we're doing is we're actually performing as we would as if we were a professional project, people engaged in a professional project. And so what we're looking for here is reflection on your Agile cycle. What was completed, what wasn't completed, where are we up to, are we meeting those kinds of requirements? And identify whether any changes need to come about to your final and third Agile cycle as a result of all of the work that you've done and all of the feedback that you have now received. You have a lot more information now than you did when you started, so obviously things are going to need to be updated. Now, in terms of representing those updates, in Agile Cycle 1, many of you just decided that change was needed and you moved things around, you deleted or added new tasks. In a real project management environment, that is not the way we do things. We create what are called project change logs. This is where we identify, as you can see in this diagram here on the right at the bottom, every time we want something to change now, we actually need to document that, justify it, and get permission for that change. So now you're going to be actively bringing your client into this change process, and they are going to say whether that change is approved or not, because this project belongs to them. They get to say what is appropriate and what is not. So as a result of all of your previous work and your reviews, if there are changes that are going to be made, they now need to be documented in this way. So who is recommending the change? What is the change? You can have some dates there if you need to, but what we're more interested in is what is the impact on the scope because of this change? What is the impact on the schedule because of this change? Are there any financial implications? In our case, there's probably not, because we don't really have a strong financial imperative in our particular project, but it is something to give some consideration to. And then you have an approved sign-off. This is where you need to ensure that your client is actually agreeing or not to that particular change. They can say no, do this anyway, or don't do this, or change it in a particular different way. So what you need to ensure that you do before you submit this assignment is that they have seen this change log and they have approved it, and therefore it goes into this. So this is not an opportunity for you to just identify potential changes. You actually need to get them approved, because your next cycle is going to rely on that approval. So in this section, we are using both Gantt charts, which is a very standard project management tool. If you don't have them, you can use them through Excel, or in fact, you can download free versions of them all over the place. And then you can create a project changelog template. Again, similarly, templates can be found all over the web, or you can just create your own basic one, something like this. But we want methodology in this section, which we didn't really have a lot of in our previous version. So that's basically the major component that relates to the report. So it's a large report. There are new sections. There are new roles. So this is something you need to get working on in addition to the continual development of the actual technical artifact. So there's quite a lot of work to be done in this cycle. In addition to that work, so the development and the documentation, of course, we're going to be having self and peer reviews just like we did in our first semester. And these assist us in identifying your contributions to your project and the way you are working as a member, and whether you are showing professionalism across the attributes of that assessment, and whether you are going out and finding insight, doing your own self-directed learning, and bringing that back to improve the outcomes of the project. So these will be just as they were in the first assessment. You will do a self-review where you identify your time spent on tasks and your contribution to the core tasks of that particular cycle. You will talk about what you are trying to do and what you are trying to improve on. And this is really important because it helps both myself and the rest of your team understand your perspective on what you are actually doing. If you don't have this, they can just assume something about your activity that may or may not actually be accurate. So we want detail in these reviews. We want insight about you, your activities, what you're trying to achieve, what struggles you're actually having. So if you're not comfortable exploring that in a meeting, you do it through this document. This will help your client, myself, and your team understand you better. You need to submit the self-review at the same time that the group assignment goes in. So in this case, that's on the Thursday, 5 p.m., the 20th of August. So in the same group box that the Agile report goes into, this goes in as well. And that allows the rest of your team to read them all and get some insight before they do their peer review the next day. The peer review is based on the same criteria as it was for last semester, and this allows every individual member to individually reflect on the performance of their team members. Not everybody works the same, and not everybody's showing the same kind of quality. And this gives us an opportunity to differentiate the people who are doing well versus not well in a particular team. This allows for the opportunity for those who are doing a lot of effort and a lot of good work to be congratulated and rewarded for that work, whereas people who are sitting back, not taking leadership, not actually fulfilling quality work, do not get rewarded for that. So just as it was in your second semester, this is actually due into your individual Milo Dropbox, and it happens the day after the group submission. So in this case, this is at 10 a.m. on the 21st of August in your individual group box. But the templates will be very similar. However, every time we have a new Agile cycle, there is an updated self-review template. So there is additional information related to this particular cycle. So please make sure that you get these new templates off Milo. You don't just reuse ones you've used before because they are no longer up to date. One of our final requirements for our Agile phase is to actually demonstrate the technical artifact, both in terms of functionality, interface, and contributions. So once again, we've done this preliminarily in Kit 301, where you were asked to showcase what has actually been designed and developed. Again, we're going to be a little bit more rigorous now. We're performing this task, whereas before we were practicing this task. So in week 7 in our management meeting, your whole team is going to attend and your whole team is going to undertake a demonstration. So we're going to be seeing the changes to the interface that have happened over the last 6 or 7 weeks, the changes to the functionality that have resulted in the new insights that you have from your users and your client, how the software is actually going about meeting the needs of your client and users, so you'll assess that. And it's really important here that each team member recognizes that their responsibility in the demonstration is to show what has happened in the technical system because of their work. Because all of you are ICT students, everyone is expected to make a contribution to the outcome of this particular project. So it's not enough just for some people to work on documentation or some people just to work on mapping and modeling. You have to show that you have had a contribution to the actual system. So what we're going to be doing here is going around and ensuring that everybody can show that something in the system is there because of the work that they have put together. That's going to be the difference between how we did demonstrations in first semester and how we're going to be doing them in second semester. Again, for these demonstrations, we do not need slides or anything pre-prepared, but an online Zoom meeting where everybody can work through the parts that they are responsible for. So I've given you quite a bit of information. There's a lot of information on the unit outline and the assignment specifications, and all of that is already available in the Milo site. So what we want you to do now is get back together with your team and your client and head off from whence you finished at Agile 1. So the things I want you to do immediately are get together with your team and review the team membership. So look for any differences. Like I said, not every team has the same membership. Some lost members. And so I will send you that email. If you get one of those, reassess who's in your current team. I need you to review and allocate the new set of roles, and somebody, probably the new project manager, will send me an email letting me know who is taking what role and responsibility in this new set of cycles. I want you as a team to organize your new team meeting schedule. So figure out when you're all available and what mechanism you're using to meet. Again, you are expected to meet at least once a week, all together face-to-face through Zoom or some other mechanism, so that you allocate roles, you assess the allocation of those tasks, and you give feedback to your members so everybody knows how to progress every single week. As you create these, I want you to write meeting minutes for those team meetings, and I want you again to put them into the group folder that's available on Milo so that I can see the progress of your team every single week and know who is meant to be working on what particular tasks. I want you to review your previous unit materials. What you've noticed, hopefully, from what we've talked about so far, is there is a lot of past material you have access and experience with that now needs to be used in this particular project. So, of course, we're going back to project management because we're using a lot of that material in here. We're using the templates and the documents and such. You're going to, of course, be using software development, so you're pulling knowledge and insights from those units to help you design and develop your artifact. Some of you will be doing business process innovation or business process management, and so for our mapping activity, that is going to be very useful information to draw forward here. Many of you will be undertaking or have undertaken an HCI unit or some kind of design specification unit. And so that insight is going to be very useful both in terms of navigation, structure, mapping, ease of use, interface design, all of those kinds of things. So go back and inform yourself again about the principles there. And then, of course, the final one for this particular round is security and privacy. So go back to your introductory units about maintaining the need of privacy and how one goes about doing that and the importance of policy and process. And then, of course, for anybody who's done cybersecurity or those related units, bring that insight into here for this Agile report to figure out how you are going to secure your particular system to limit the vulnerabilities that your system might bring about. I also want you to contact your clients and get access to a typical type user set and set up meetings. I need you to ensure that whoever is the client liaison is maintaining constant weekly communication with your client. Now, that doesn't mean you have to meet with them every week, but they must receive something from you every week to ensure that you are meeting their particular requirements and you are keeping them up to date with progress. So whoever's role that is, it is your responsibility to set up meetings, to set up a schedule of meetings, to set up an agenda of meetings. And once you have those meetings, again, I want you to write them up as minutes and also drop them into the Milo site so that I, every week, can figure out who's doing what and what decisions are being made in your team to monitor if everything's going right between our management meetings. In week 2, we are going to have a management meeting, and I'm going to be sending out an email to your project managers getting you to identify appropriate times for your management meeting. I'll be giving you lots of options. This is not a preference list. This is an availability list. So this needs to ensure that every member of your team is available at the times you identify, and then we will set up a schedule. Once we've set up the schedule, we will have our first one in week 2. And at that stage, I will share with you any feedback from your clients that I got at the end of the last cycle. We will be talking about the plans for moving forward, the kind of mapping that is likely to be appropriate for your project and such. In week 5, we will have a management meeting, and this is where we are going to review a draft of your first Agile report. So we'll spend some time looking at your draft, giving you feedback, and that will give you an opportunity to revise and improve that before submission in week 6. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of technical work, there's a lot of documentation work, there's a lot of research work, and then there's a lot of practical work in terms of interacting with users and clients. So your team needs to be absolutely on fire this semester. A thing that's really important to understand is in the previous semester, we gave you opportunities to learn this kind of thing. Now we're expecting you to show proficiency that we would expect for people doing this in real life industry. So now's the opportunity to really dig deep, identify what your weaknesses are and work on those to really showcase your skill sets, because that's what we and your clients are hoping to see. So in summary to all of that information, most of the stuff you need is already on Milo. A thing to note about 302 to differentiate it from 301 is that in 301 we gave you opportunities to learn new skills and to practice those skills. Some of you were great at them, some of you still needed some improvement, but you were given 3 different areas or 3 different cycles that you could actually get some feedback on to learn areas for improvement. That opportunity has now finished. In 302 you have less opportunity to continually get better. We expect you now to be performing at a high level of both quality and interaction and behavior. There is no room in 302 for laziness, for people to become uninterested, for people to be late on attending meetings or late on the tasks that they are working on. You are expected to perform in 302, whereas you were given opportunities to practice in 301. This is because the workload is bigger in 302. As you'll see already from this one report, there's a lot more to do. The assessment is weighted more heavily. Late penalties will apply. Some of you got very comfortable with the fact that you might submit something late on Milo and not being too fussed about it. Well, now we're being professional. So late penalties are going to have consequences. You have repeated opportunities for improvement, which means you should be getting it right the first time. You've done most of this stuff before now. You must attend and actively participate in all aspects of the project. That's all meetings, all demonstrations, all of the activities that we run. It's not enough to not turn up or to, if you turn up, to make no active contribution to that meeting. Everybody will be expected to do so and be monitored for that. And this is your opportunity to show if you have gained the project-related skills required of an ICT professional. This is the last chance you have of doing that before you go out into industry. Project is also an opportunity for clients to come to us and say, who would you recommend? Or from my client team, do you think these people would be good at? They often come to us with a recruitment perspective as well. And so this is your opportunity to showcase to your client, to your users and other relevant stakeholders that you have what it takes to actually be an ICT professional. A lot of our students actually move into positions with the client that they've been working on. So give that some thought if that is something that is a useful strategy for you. But either way, this is your capstone unit. This is the opportunity where you have to show that you have these skills. Good luck. You're about to get a lot of emails from me. There's a lot of work to be done, but I am sitting here on the other side of Zoom. Please call me. Please have a chat. Please ask me lots of questions. I will see you in week 2. Looking forward to it. Take care. Head off to Milo now and start working through all of that material.